Hello, my name is Callie, and I have the privilege of sharing with you my experience out of the Art Institute in Chicago, where I saw an exhibit entitled Windows on the War, which is about Soviet task posters at home and abroad during World War II, primarily between the years of 1941 and 1945, because tasks started in 1941. The poster I will be focusing on is entitled The Moralistic Wolf, in parentheses, a fable. This poster was produced July 19th, 1943. It was created by Pavel Sokolov-Skalia and Damien Bedney. The former created the image and the latter person I mentioned did the text. Um, so to really understand this a little bit more, I will provide a brief synopsis of the history of the tasks and the Soviet Union's involvement in World War II. So World War II actually started in 1939, and Soviet Union wasn't really involved too much at that time. They made a pact with Nazi Germany, so they kind of had an alliance going on, but then Hitler broke that alliance June 22nd, 1941. He invaded Soviet Union, and immediately following this, a group of artists and writers in Moscow joined forces under the name of the TASS News Agency to produce these war posters, which they called Okna TASS or TASS Windows. These were designed to rile up the patriotism of the citizens of the Soviet Union and reveal what's going on and to paint Germany in a very, 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 very negative light if you look at these posters. The 1,418 days Germany was in the Soviet Union were and still are acknowledged by Russia as the Great Patriotic War, which is interesting considering how in the United States we just call it World War II. It doesn't really have that much meaning behind it, but the Great Patriotic War has a lot of connotations behind it. And it, this being in Soviet Union is kind of interesting considering you don't think of it as a very patriotic country. We usually see it as dark and communist and just a mess. But during this time, the agency task produced around 1,240 designs. They revealed the Soviet perspective of World War II and how the war progressed. From an artistic view, we see an evolution of visual and literary design and style. And the method and medium behind this is definitely propaganda. Propaganda tends to have like a negative connotation, but this is propaganda down to its core, even though it was intended to fight the evil Nazi powers. It's similar to how there was a lot of war propaganda in the United States at the time as well, which was actually at the exhibit too. So, just a little tidbit. The fascinating aspect of these posters is how they reveal more about art and history at the same time. We can learn more about graphic art and poster design, as well as these hidden messages from World War II that we didn't really know before. In a sense, these posters were used also as ambassadors, since the Soviets sent them to the United States and Great Britain to raise awareness and support for the Soviet war effort. Then, once the United States joined Great Britain and the Soviet Union in the fight against Germany, they were used as reporting progress on the Eastern Front and promoting an alliance. All these ideas of alliance and working together definitely totally went out the window once World War II was over. This friendship the United States and the Soviet Union had ended as the Cold War started, and that's why these posters kind of were hidden. They were not discovered until the late 1990s in a storage closet in the Art Institute. So that's a long span of time between when they were actually sent there because they were sent there between the years 1942 and 1945. And I thought that was very interesting. The bios of these artists are slightly long but interesting since it reveals they were involved in politics before the task formed. Toward the end of the 1930s, Sokolov-Skalia worked as a book illustrator and theater set designer. He was also an instructor at various art studios within Moscow. Additionally, during this time he received some critical success for painting nationalist subjects. Sokolov-Skalia became the artist director of the TASS studio, designing 200 posters between when they formed in 1941 until 1946. Following the war, he produced several large paintings glorifying Stalin. His awards include the Stalin Prize in 1942 and 1949 and the honorific title People's Artist of the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic in 1956. He died in 1961. The creator of the poem, Ben Nia, was involved in radical politics. His manner of writing was political verse and verse satire. He published a book of satirical fables in 1913. As an active member of the Bolshevik Party, he corresponded with Vladimir Lenin, and his anti-czarist and anti-religious poetry enjoyed great popularity during the Civil War. In the 1920s, Ben Nia was close to the Communist Party, published constantly in major newspapers and satirical magazines, and wrote constantly for propaganda posters. A satirical play he wrote in 1936 entitled The Heroic Knights was actually deemed by Soviet authorities as distorting and insulting Russian history. In 1938, he was expelled from the Communist Party, unable to publish, and sold off his extensive library. Ben Nia's reputation started to restore itself once he joined the TASS and was recognized as one of the most productive and successful TASS poets. He died just days after the war ended in 1945. These artists are definitely similar to Hannah Hoke and John Heartfield. They all rejected Nazism and Hitler, but they were also similar since they used art to present their political agenda and were dedicated to art groups, such as Dada, whose purpose was to spread a message about politics. The funny thing about it is that Hoke and Heartfield were rejecting their country, while Sokolov, Scalia, and Ben Nia were promoted theirs. I would also like to mention that this work reminded me of Glenn Ligon because the artist used stencils to create it. While Ligon used stencils for text, this poster used stenciling for its images. Stencils were a breakthrough for TASS posters, and a lot of them used stencils because they allowed artists to recreate the painter's original image, especially as they became more advanced. The Moralistic Wolf is a piece of propaganda. Its specific subject matter is to demonize Hitler, which is immediately apparent by the wolf and the Nazi hat. Additionally, the subject is to portray an alliance between Great Britain, the United States, and the Soviet Union, as you can see in the background by the bombs. The three-flag alliance became a staple of TASS lexicon. A lot of their posters feature the three flags together in some sort of fashion. Certain compositional elements that make this poster stand out are definitely its size and its extensive text. The actual size of the poster is 8 feet tall, which is not typical for war posters. Also not typical of war posters is the amount of text. The text is actually a poem and the image was inspired by it. The poem goes as follows. Let us tell a little fable, let us recall, not ancient times. In a certain village an unusually fierce wolf turned up as a neighbor. Not that he killed the lambs and calves instead of feeding on grass. Oh no, he was so fierce he did not allow the people any peace, and savagely at berry time and mushroom time he hunted for their children. It's no surprise that this fierce wolf became renowned. They said, in strength and in character he's like a wild boar, and in his mouth there are not fangs but tusks. The peasants murmured among themselves and staged a raid on the wolf. Get him, they cried from all sides. Get him! Quickly losing his mate and cubs, the wolf began to suffer, as they say, the drama. The peasants have a treacherous plan. One thing worse than the next. If you don't get caught in a trap, you'll fall into a wolf pit. The peasants will appear and take you alive. What a shameless approach. And with this pitiful wailing, the wolf declared, emitting slime from his eyes, some liar tried to tell me that humans have ethics and morals. I don't see any ethics in them at all. The wolf in this poem symbolizes Hitler. Ben Nia did this to reverse readers' expectations by making him look like a pathetic hypocrite instead of a merciless predator. I found this rather funny, the specific line, which is a reference to the wolves not eating grass but hunting children. It was actually a jab at Hitler's vegetarianism. It creates irony when looking at his bloodthirsty aims and actions. Additionally, there's a quote in the top right corner of the text box which states, "Air bombardments of cities are contrary to ethical laws," which is part of a speech by German Air Force General Claudi. The historical context of this, as stated in the book, goes as follows. Now I'd like to focus more at the image. It relates directly to the words of the poem. The first thing that catches the audience's attention is the wolf with its Nazi hat. It is a very ugly sight, which is what the artist intends to do, since the wolf is a symbol of Hitler and he wants it to appear evil. With slime in its eyes, not tears, and his tail between his legs, he appears as a complete coward. The idea of Hitler as a hypocrite is just as prevalent in the image as it is in the text, since the right paw rests on a volume entitled Code of Morality, while it's standing over human skeletons. The skeletons obviously symbolize the tremendous amount of people killed due to the Nazi regime. Therefore, it does not make sense for the regime to criticize the bombings by Allies, considering how many people were dying because of Hitler. The background is another part of the image that is important to pay attention to. The flags of Great Britain, United States, and the Soviet Union are each on a bomb blowing up a German city.
When I was viewing this poster,
the flags were to symbolize an alliance
between
the
entirely in its original form. I do not get that full perception of the work because of the environment I was in. The poster was featured in a nice gallery with crisp lighting to heighten the image's details. To get the full grasp on what it felt like as a Soviet citizen viewing this poster would be impossible without a time machine. This poster would have been hung somewhere in the streets of Moscow during World War II, where people were terrified and the lighting was rather dim. I've never looked at the Soviet Union as a victim or an ally of the United States before. That might sound weird, but when you learn about World War II, you kind of look just at Great Britain and France were United States allies, but the Soviet Union was there too. So therefore, I did not really have any assumptions because the experience of Soviets during World War II is never even discussed at all when you're talking about World War II. So I guess my attitude was that the Soviet Union was a very violent country during this time because you hear a lot of atrocities that Soviet Union soldiers made against Germans, and they would just do whatever they could to defeat Germany. I think the original audience was shocked by this piece, primarily because of how gigantic it was. It would definitely increase their hatred of Hitler and Germany while increasing their appreciation of the Soviet Union's allies. Additionally, any Soviets who were skeptical of the morality of the bombing of German cities by the British and Americans would have seen this poster as justifying their actions. This poster would have most likely made them feel more comfortable with the bombings, since it is primarily saying that Hitler started killing people first, and therefore it's okay if we start to kill people because we kind of need to in order to defeat Hitler. So given my time and place as a viewer, this piece just initially made me laugh. The weird thing is that the first thing that drew my attention was not the wolf, it was the bombings in the back with the 3 flags. I just think it's funny how such a strong alliance is portrayed with these flags, because I know that the friendship between the US and Soviet Union doesn't last, and now in current times we really make fun of it a lot because the Cold War is over, and now it's just kind of tense still between the Russian Federation actually, and the United States. So when looking at how this poster has to do with bombings, however, it makes me feel rather uneasy. The fact that innocent civilians were killed from Allied bombings is really unfair and unjust because these people had nothing to do with the war. I know how in times of war these actions are constantly deemed as necessary, especially with World War II. People saw it as a complete necessity and constantly justified it as finding the means to an end. I, however, still find it very unethical. The poster just makes the Allies look evil to me because it's just them directly bombing a city in the background, and it's like, well, you have Hitler in the front as a wolf looking evil, but that kind of looks evil in the back too, even though it's supposed to be just. And I mentioned earlier how this piece and other posters bring an unexplored perspective on World War II. If you really analyze the pieces like The Moralistic Wolf, a Fable, in historical context, it can reveal so much about history. However, this is not just with war posters. Any piece of art can reveal something about history and what a certain time period was like if you really pick it apart and ask intuitive questions. And I encourage everybody to do this.